All right, so following up on what we did last time, which was a lot of on the question of science, of hard, ancient but hard science. If when it encounters Torah, we saw different models of reaction. I want to mix a little bit of history and machshava and halacha today because that's what's necessary. What I want to do is, first of all, I want to take a look at areas of science and so-called secular studies for which there was never any question that they were required, that they were part of the Torah. Then I want to look at how did it happen that Jewish philosophy started, because it started into a very specific context. And then I want to talk about, and that will lead us to a discussion, not completely on our radar earlier, but I think it's important, and that's the question of what's about the nature of emunah, because you'll see that it does fit in terms of how philosophy it deals here. Yes.
Can you clarify what you mean by nature of emunah?
The nature of emunah, the character of emunah. How should one develop one's faith? In other words, should it just be a pristine? Simple is not the word, but you're sort of like
a yes, I believe, check the box, or you're saying there should be a foundation.
Yes, I believe, check the box doesn't mean anything. I mean, is it something which is just a profound feeling, and I know it because I feel it, or should one really work to rationalize and to develop arguments why you believe what you believe? What's better? And you can argue it both ways. We're going to see that this is a direct result of the encounter with the outside world. Okay, I'll give you another parallel. I was not going to mention this till later, but maybe I mention it now. It's appropriate. It's today's Yud-Tes Kislev. The Chabad Hassidus is a very intellectualized form of Hassidut, and it's into speculative Kabbalah, and it's very, very even though some of the terms perhaps it deals with or the concepts it deals with are not in themselves rational, the mode by which they study is it tries to be very logical and tries to be very rational. Okay, if you take a look, for example, in the Chabad theory of prayer, it gets very, very technical. If you take, for example, and Rabbi Steinsaltz, in fact, wrote a very long parish on this. The third Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, wrote a book called Derech Mitzvotecha, which is all about. It basically goes through most of the mitzvot in the Torah, and it gives a halachic analysis, and then gives a Hasidic analysis how the mitzvah fits into the overall Kabbalistic and Hasidic overlook. Largely, yeah, but it's very, very sophisticated, very, very, very intellectualized. A major piece of this work deals with prayer. I mean, it's 50 chapters or something like that. And Rabbi Steinsaltz wrote a systematic commentary on that one section of Derech Mitzvotecha. It takes up 2 volumes. It's really, it's quintessential Steinsaltz in the sense that it makes things that seem, if you read the text itself, you wouldn't know what he was talking about, and all of a sudden you read him, and then you know what he's talking about. Because the commentary is based on lectures and shiurim he gave in various places, but that's not the issue right now. At the beginning of that discourses, the Tzemach Tzedek notes that when you pray, according to Lubavitch at least, every single prayer and every single approach to God should be aimed at a specific quality, a specific attribute of God.
Just like Chabad Siddur, like the type of dot you're supposed to have beneath the word. Correct,
exactly. So it gets very, very technical, very, 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 very disciplined, and I remember when I read it. The first time. I said, going, so there's so much stuff here. When do you daven? I mean, when does this uplifting emotional experience come? And the truth of the matter is that there's this tension between a sophisticated form of prayer and a simple form of prayer It's a tension that exists, first of all, between Lubavitch and many other forms of Hasidus. And also within Lubavitch itself. So, for example, there was a major battle in the beginning, in the life of the founder of Chabad, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman of Ladi, the Alter Rebbe, the Balatanya, between him and another student of a mutual student of they both had the same Rebbe, which was an ancestor actually of my wife. That shows you how in my family it gets to be very, because we're descended from the Gross family, and she's descended from this senior Talmud of the Midrash Magid, whose Yortzeit is also today, by the way. It's one of the reasons why non-Chabad Hasidim also observe the 19th of Kislev, because it's the Yortzeit of the Magid of Mizrich, who was the premier disciple of the Baal Shem Tov. Anyways, this other student of Reb Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk, whose name was Avram of Kalisk, he was much more into the emotional, experiential dancing type of dance of whatever. So this tension is there constantly. Yes.
But doesn't it speak about in Perek Dalet, the Tanya, how that prayer and in general is supposed to be like pulling at the garments of Hashem, and then
correct.
Then, isn't that kind of contradicted by not the secularization of tefillah, but this
no, I didn't say secularization.
No,
I said intellectualization. That's not the same.
But you've almost systematically removed any connection with it.
Right. It's the same problem. The problematic goes back to the very beginning. Absolutely, you're absolutely right. But this is not just this issue of intellectualized or more sophisticated, or whatever you want to call it, a more technical prayer versus vis-a-vis more sort of spontaneous. Everything we know about the Baal Shem Tov, right? About the little kid with the whistle and throwing up the letters and stuff like that. So it's not unique to Hasidus. So, for example, the Tzemach Tzedek quotes a tshuva of the Rivash, Rabbi Yitzchak ben Sheshet, who was really the Gadol Hador, the major posek in Spain in the late 14th century. He himself was forced to flee Spain because there was a nationwide pogrom in 1391, which brought him to North Africa. Anyway, so he has a tshuva, a long tshuva in terms about Kabbalah. And in the context of that tshuva, it's if you want to take a look, it's either Kufyud or Reshut. I don't remember at this minute. He quotes one of the last of the Balei Tosfos in France, whose name his name was Rabbi Nathaniel of Chinon, how it was recited the same, but Chinon today, who wrote a book called Sefer Kritot, and Rabbi Nathaniel basically discusses this whole question of sophisticated prayer and the use of the mind and stuff like that vis-a-vis emotion, and he respectfully discusses it. And then at the end he says, I don't know why I need this, because the way to approach God is like a little child coming before their father and just laying forth one's soul to him and having a very intimate kind of relationship, and that's all. And the truth of the matter is that I can exactly get into it, but when we say about faith, the same kind of tension exists with regard to faith. What is the best way to faith? Faith is a defining moment in who you are. It's who you are and what you are in your heart and your soul, and you don't need more than that. And by the way, things that I know things. You can know things that can't be quantified. You can love without having it quantified. You can never prove love. You can never prove red, and you can never prove taste. These are things which you experience and you know them to be true. Okay, so modern philosophy says no. If you can't quantify it, if you can't prove it objectively in some kind of form, it doesn't exist. It's baloney. I never understood that kind of the modern philosophy where things which aren't the mind body problem, right? If it's not mathematically provable, then it's not there. It defies. And Kant took it on and rejected it too. Yeah.
I'm going to say something kind of cynical here. Those things you listed, I can't remember the third. You said love, red.
I was throwing things out. Love is certainly one.
Something like that. Okay, you can just put it down to a mission performance. Like, I don't really understand how you can say that an objective proof for God, or a proof for God, can be a bedrock for...
I didn't say it was bad. I said that there are those who say that it's superior to just believe purely, because you know what? Because the minute that you say I can prove something,
If you can't,
then you can't. That introduces doubt. And by the way, it also means, I'm not trying to be judgmental, but it also means that if I can prove something one way or the other, so it has been argued. I'm not saying that I believe this, but it has been argued that one of the conundra of Jewish history is, how is it that the record of Ashkenazim versus Sephardim in terms of martyrdom is so very different? The perception is that more Ashkenazim died or were willing and ready to die al Kiddush Hashem than be converted or convert in order to save their lives. Whereas the argument is maintained that the opposite is true of. Now, when I talk Sephardim, I'm talking about Spanish. I'm not talking about North African Jews. One of the explanations for this, now as it happens, more Jews converted than the Ashkenazim are willing to admit, and more Jews died than the Sephardim can prove. But the trend seems to be so. In terms of the mass of Spanish Jews converted or allowed themselves to be converted in the wake of the 100 years of not consistent, but persecution between 1391 and 1492, when the Jews were expelled from Spain. So one of the arguments that is made to explain this is that Ashkenazim had a faith by which they did not hold beliefs, but they were held by their beliefs. Let's do it that way. Okay. Whereas Sephardim, now not every Spanish Jew knew philosophy, but there was a sense that when you predicate everything on intellectualism, you can, on the one hand, yes, you can reinforce and strengthen your faith. On the other hand, you can also rationalize.
There's always a smart special.
Correct. So that becomes the part of the question. Yeah.
I mean, there's also a 50-page essay against that whole theory that basically says that by the time of the pogroms, especially the anti-Maimonidean school had basically won over in most of Spain, particularly in Castile, where the majority of things were going on.
Listen, there are those who've argued that Kabbalah might have played a bigger role.
As well.
Because Kabbalah opened up the possibility that God could manifest himself as more than a single unity. That's true. Okay, I'm saying, but this is an argument that was made especially by ethicists and moralists who lived after the expulsion. And listen, the mass conversions are probably due to many, many different things. It's probably true. One factor may well have been that after 100 years of persecution, people just gave up. After another, it might also be that Jews, just the idea of leaving the home that you've been there for 1,000 years was just too much to handle. It is true that this is not for now, but that Spanish Jews did profoundly believe that they were the elite of Judaism, and that Spain was something of a substitute for Eretz Israel. Okay, if you want to take a look at the end of, there's a coda or an appendix that Don Yitzchak Abravanel adds to the end of his commentary on Malachim, where he lays out the sort of the founding mythology of the founding legends around the coming of the Jews to Spain, and you see immediately that they see Eretz. There's this idea that, in fact, you could even argue that. You could even make the case that some Spanish Jews thought the Mashiach would first come to Spain, and then everybody would go to Eretz Yisrael. Hey, when there was a rumor in 1986 that the Mashiach was coming, and all the Lubavitchers were screaming that they want to go, they have to go to Brooklyn, and so even some committed Lubavitchers said, "Are we supposed to go to Israel? No, we want to be the first in Brooklyn, then we want to see what the Rebbe says, and then we'll see for it." So I mean, this concept does exist, okay, over history. But in any case, the So that's another possibility. Kabbalah is another possibility. It is also possible that the anti-Maimonideans may have won out in large numbers, but the upper classes who set the tone, if your leadership is converting, if your leadership has become relativist, then you're going to say, well, if they're already converting, so who am I? Right? So I mean, there's a lot of factors, and more Jews left than are usually said, but the overwhelming majority stayed. So you have this. It's not like in Portugal. In Portugal, the Jews the borders were closed and the ports were closed, and the priests went out with big barrels of holy water and just spritzed it on all the Jews, and poof, you're all Christians, and that's a whole nother ballgame. But in Spain, there is argument. This idea that you need to prove faith, that strengthens faith, that's better, is a matter of debate, and we will get to that. Right. Okay. So let's start with number one. So first of all, as far as arguing that nothing outside of what's in the Gemara or something, anything else in the outside world is not legitimate, is contradicted by Chazal. So take a look, for example. This is a Gemara in Shabbos, Daf Ayin Hey Adal Amud Aleph. Amir Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi, Amir Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Mishum Bar Kapara. Kol hayodea l'chashev b'tkufot u'mazlot ve'no choshev alav ha'katuv omer ve'et po'al Hashem lo yabitu u'maseh yadav lo ra'u. If you don't know your astronomy, if you don't know how to calculate the calendar, then you have done an avera by at best, not appreciating God's wonders. In other words, when you study hard science, you're mekayim a mitzvah. All right? And he has a pasuk, Po'al Hashem lo yabitu. You don't appreciate the God's action, God's achievements, and they didn't see, they were blind to his actions. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Not only all right, so you do it, you didn't do it. So if you don't do it, then what have you done? You violated, you've done an avera of omission, right? Yeah.
From what age are they supposed to know this?
That's a good question. So that's a very good question. I don't know. It's a good question. Considering the fact that people died young.
Is it from bar mitzvah or is it from?
Maybe later, maybe after you've gotten a solid. I would guess. Okay, based on the Rambam.
That's the thing. Avot sets out a kind of very basic curriculum, and the Rambam expands on it.
Right, but
the question is where in the Avot.
So the Rambam makes it very clear. That no matter that it's a mitzvah to have a broader education. He defines Torah very broadly, and we'll get to that too today, I hope. But if not next week. Which would be kind of funny to do that, talk about, Hellenism and stuff. It'll be, middle Hanukkah. Everything is always relevant.
But you can write Sefer Torah in Greek.
Right, beside it. But in any case, the Rambam made it very clear, even the Rambam says, you don't do any of this stuff until you have a solid Torah education. Yeah. 13, 14, I don't know what that means, because, first of all, kids started learning younger. And second of all, they didn't live as long. And even assuming, say, that your critical faculties only kicked into action like today around 11, 12, 13, something like that, or maybe 14, you still, you could still do facts and stuff like that. But it's more than that. If your study of astronomy, for example, is appreciative, if your study of astronomy is appreciative, then you can do. My grandchildren know all about the planets and stuff like that. It's not something you say, and you say also massive gracious. It's not like it's totally out of the woods. But here if you don't do it, it's a sin of omission. But then comes Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani in the name of Rabbi Yochanan and says Menayan shemitzvah al adam.
That's it.
There's a positive mitzvah. It's not a kiyuma mitzvah of akarasato. It's a positive mitzvah. L'chashev tkufotu mazalot. Mazalot doesn't mean astrology. Mazalot are the constellations in terms of knowing your way and how the heavens move. Shenema ushmartem vasitem kihi chochmatchem uvinatchem le'enei ha'amim. Okay? Shmartem means is a negative commandment. Asitem is a positive commandment because he chochmatchem uvinatchem leinei ha'amim. Ezo hi chochma uvina shi leinei ha'amim hevei omer zeh chishuv tkufot u'mazalot. In other words, how does one demonstrate the Jews' superior intellectual accomplishments and wisdom? By virtue of the fact that Jews were masters of astronomy, yes, and astrology too, because at the time they thought it was a science. All right, but so all the major astronomers, many major astronomers were Jews, and why? What's leinei hamim? Because look, if I'm going to give a shir on Takfo Kohen, all right. One of the hardest things probably a person can be expected to do if you're a Ram or Rosh Hashiva. But you give a Kohen of Takfai Kohen. You promise that in the course of 4 months you're going to go through all of the Shav Shmaitza, and everybody's going to walk out wowed and understand everything in the Shav Shmaitza. All right? The guy on the street, there are them going on the street, but if you're in a place where there's a guy on the street, even if the professor is not going to understand, much less appreciate the brilliance of your shiurim on Shev Shmaitza and Takfo Kohen. All right? What's the Shev Shmaitza? Okay, so the Takfo Kohen is a sugi in Bava Metzia. What happens if you have an animal which is Meiser Behema? Which is if you have something which just goes to the Kohen. Now you have the right to give to the Kohen, but what happens if some random Kohen grabs it?
What parak is this?
Takfo Kohen's first parak. The Shach has a sefer this thick on Takfo Kohen. All right, the Shav Shmaitza is a book of it's a brilliant and very basic book in Lumdis. It was written by Rabbi Leib HaKohen, who was the author of the Ketzos, better known. On Choshen Mishpat, and it goes through questions of what's a doubt and what's not a doubt, and what's a chazaka and what's a rove, and how do you make different determinatives. What?
No,
It's a really challenging. It's a really challenging and a very very basic sefer. But it's very advanced. Okay, but the average guy in the street, it might a guy, he's not going to understand it. But if a Jew predicts predicts all the eclipses for the next 2,500 years, everybody can appreciate that. Meaning, there are parts of Torah, first of all, apparently, because it's a mitzvah, there are parts of Torah that are for our own use, because what? We have a calendar. And if our calendar collapses, God forbid, then there's no Yiddishkeit. Right? What? Oh. Okay, so I'll get to that when we put it. I'll tell you in a minute. I will tell you in a minute. But it's also parts of Torah which demonstrate to the broader world. So it's an area that is accessible to the average intelligent person. How could the calendar collapse? Very simple. The Rambam in the Sefer Mitzvos, he says this in the Mishnah Torah too, but he says it far more explicitly in the Sefer Mitzvahs. It's a mitzvah to say Kuf Nun Zayin. The Rambam says that the authority to calculate the question is, there's no Sanhedrin. There's no Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin, how they used to do the calendar? They have two witnesses. They come to the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin would declare Rosh Chodesh. They would investigate. What did the new moon look like? Was it in the east? Was it in the west? Everybody in the Sanhedrin had to know basic astronomy. Okay, how big was it? How long did it stay? How long did it stay in the sky? I mean, go try to find what's called the molad, the first little sliver of the moon on Rosh Chodesh. It's not simple. That's one of the reasons why in Shul nobody wakes up to do this, I don't think. But they'll announce that the molad will be on Tuesday at 35 hours and 75 chalakim after whatever. So why? Because it's until the second day or third day you really don't see it. Certainly not till the second day. Okay. In any event, so you need to then they would take a vote and they would declare it the Rosh Chodesh. That's the reason why. That's the original historically. I mean, Chazal say the reason historically why there is a second day of Yom Tov, because it's very nice. How do you notify people that it's Rosh Chodesh when the only power that's allowed to what's the word, to declare the Rosh Chodesh is the Sanhedrin in Yerushalayim or a subcommittee thereof. Now, and since they were plus or minus one, so what would happen? First they tried using signal fires, and then they started using messengers to get as far as they could to spread the word that it was Yontif. But they didn't always get there, and there was a plus or minus 1 day, because a month can either be 29 days or 30 days. So there was plus or minus 1 day thing. So what the people of Chutzlaretz would do is they would mathematically try to calculate when Yontif was. But because Sanhedrin has the one plus or minus 1 day power to determine when Rosh Chodesh is, it could very well be that the calculations of people in Egypt or in Babylonia or in northern Syria were not, never mind in Greece, or in Rome, were not accurate. So what did they do? Since it's only a matter of plus or minus 1 day, that's when they started tacking on a second day of Chag. Now. Okay, now that raises the whole question of say Yontif Sheni B'Zman Hazeh, but I don't want to go into that right this minute. The question after in the year around the year, let me see, Rambam, in the early 4th century, there was no Catholic Church. The Church, the Christians who had already taken power, wanted to mess up the Jewish calendar, partly to undermine Judaism, but mostly to prevent Christians from also celebrating Jewish holidays, because there was this sort of period of overlap. What?
Is that an issue?
Sure. Jesus did them. That was their right. No, that was their.
Jesus was a Jew.
Right. So that's but so that becomes getting the.
I guess that's Paul's chiddush, so to speak, in his school.
Right. Exactly.
To move them away from the Judaizing Christianity.
Correct. Here it is. Okay. I'm sorry. It's not Kuf Nun Zayin, Kuf Nun Gimel. So what happens is it became prohibited for the Sanhedrin to send out these riders. About 100 years later, the Romans, I think it was 425, the Romans actually abolished smicha. It says you're not allowed. They basically abolished the Beit Din HaGadol. They abolished the patriarchate, and they said you're no longer allowed to ordain or to give smicha to rabbis. So as a result, there was no one authorized. There was no one authorized to calculate the holidays, and the Rambam says. So the Rambam then says that was when it was sometime in that 100 years. One of the Nesiim published or created or commissioned different discussions something called Sod HaIbur, which is a mathematical calculation by which you can determine the holidays in Rosh Chodesh based on math and based on observation. Okay. So then this becomes a whole to-do about exactly what's the relationship between, if you have this formula, who is de facto sanctifying the calendar? Is it the rabbis? Is it the math? What?
Is this also an indisputable Chazal science formula, or is it allowed to be? So I'm assuming the formulas we have now really that
The formulas we had never use the same formula.
we still use the same formula.
Yeah. In fact, the Jewish calendar our calendar is, according to some astronomers that I've spoken to, is more accurate than the Gregorian. Yeah. Okay, let me read what the Rambam writes. The Rambam writes this in Kuf Nun Gimel. That's the mitzvah of. It's the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh. V'da, says the Rambam, shacheshbon zeh shenimne oto hayom. ונדע בו ראשי חודשים והמועדים אי אפשר לעשותו אלא בארץ ישראל בלבד ובעת הצורך. It's only in Eretz Yisrael and only when it's required. ובהיעדר החכמים מארץ ישראל אז אפשר לבית דין הסמוך, להסמיך איש מפי איש מפרש רבנו, בארץ ישראל שיעבר השנים ויקבע חודשים בחוץ לארץ. But on the temporary, ובזה קושי גדול וחזק. Okay? V'hayadua tamid. שבית דין הגדול אמנם היה בארץ ישראל, והם שיקבעו חודשים, ויעברו שנים, to add an extra ER periodically, בפנים המקובלים אצלם ובקבוצם גם כן. ובכאן שורש גדול משורשי האמונה. לא ידעוהו ולא יתבונן במקומו, אלא מי שדעתו עמוקה. וזה, in other words, since the calendar is rooted in what goes on here, then all the people that are publishing Jewish calendars in America and in Britain and in France, those actions have no legal validity. It gives you information and nothing more. Okay? He says, "V'zeh sheheyotenu hayom b'chutz la'aretz." Okay? Monim b'melechet ha'ibur shebiyadenu, meaning this calculation, this formula. V'omrim shezeh hayom Rosh Chodesh, v'zeh hayom Yom Tov, lo mipnei cheshbonenu nikbanu Yom Tov, b'shum panim. Aval mipnei shebeit din hagadol shebe'eretz Yisrael kvar kav'u hu zeh hayom Rosh Chodesh o Yom Tov.
So we're relying on the kind of retroactive.
Oh, so that's the question. So the Machlokas Rishonim, what does that mean? Does that mean that does that mean theoretically that does that mean that the Sanhedrin, when they published this thing, said we are now authorizing the use of this thing here in Israel, and therefore from now on the calendars are set? Or, as the Rambam is going to say, well, let me read you the Rambam writes. I'm going to skip a couple of lines. There he goes on and says, but this calendar, so he takes one step further and he said, everybody uses it. We don't have Beit Din Hagadol, and we don't have Smicha. But we have the formula. So okay, so the guy in Rome who's got the formula, he can do it. No, it's the Jews in Eretz Yisrael who rely on this formula. When they publish the calendar, they are the ones who, by their publication of the calendar, or by their following this formula, create the calendar, and we are based on them. Says the Rambam, Hinei cheshbonenu ze lo yo'ilenu klum b'shum panim, lefi she'ein lanu lechashev chodeshim ula'aber shanim b'chutz la'aretz ela b'tnayim hazkarim, kemo shebe'arnu ki mitzion tetzei Torah dvar Hashem Yerushalayim, ukishiyitbonein mi sheyesh lo seichel shalem lishonot ha'talmud b'chavana hazeh. Okay, fine. What, in other words, who is the sovereign? The Rambam has a theory. Rav Soloveitchik develops this in one of his Yortzeit Shurim. It wasn't published in Shurim Zechem Rav Amari. It was actually published in a second volume called Kovetz Chidushei Torah. In the chapters Al Kiddush Chodesh, something like that. He basically says that there are, if you look at the Sanhedrin fills two roles. Sanhedrin still fills a role as being appointed by God, or starting with Moshe Rabbeinu, right, who then appointed the first Sanhedrin or whatever, for 70 elders, as the final authority of Torah Shebaal Peh. Okay? They interpret the Torah, they take the vote as to Rav Shammai Hillel or whatever the case might be, and their authority is top down. All right? Their authority comes from on high. There are two areas in which the Sanhedrin are a representative body: the calendar and war and peace. Chazal say that you can't go to war unless for Milchem Reshut, you don't need that. For Milchem Mitzvah, everybody's supposed to fight. But all right, let's not do that today. Too aggravated. Everybody has to go to fight, but in Milchem Mitzvah, Milchem Reshut, you take a vote, and if the people say they don't want, they overturn the Sanhedrin. Okay, you hear me? Same thing with the calendar. The calendar, there's a fascinating Tosefta, that if Bezdin Agadol votes to accept witnesses, okay, and they say Rosh Chodesh is today, all right, and there's a mass uproar, and a majority of the Jews in Israel say, no, Rosh Chodesh is tomorrow, Rosh Chodesh is tomorrow.
Why is that different to the case where Rabban Gamliel forces?
Because that's an action of the Bezdin. There's a machloket in Bezdin. You're right. It's based on a similar principle, but that's within the institution. Here, I'm saying that the sovereignty exists in the people, and in here, the people on these two issues, the people are sovereign. The calendar and war. By the way, Rav Kook argues in a famous tshuva in Mishpat Kohen that's true when it comes to the form of government. When the Torah says "Som tasim alecha melech," okay, so Rav Kook says, you are the Som tasim. In other words, the authority the authority of the king flows from the people. Therefore, he says, any government that the Jewish people in the land of Israel will set up has a din of melech, with all of the restrictions and all of the whatever. You can argue it either, however, it's a moot point. But the point is that a similar kind of approach exists with regard to that as well. But here, it's ironclad that the Tosefta said, that the people say, they can't say that it's going to be 2 weeks from now, Rosh Chodesh, because there are rules. But there is this plus or minus 1 day, and if the people decide that the day should be, the month should be chaser and not mali, or mali not chaser, the people have that right to overturn the Sanhedrin or the Sanhedrin subcommittee on calendar, because they are the sovereign. That being the case, says the Rambam, V'ani osif lecha be'ur, ilu hinachnu derech mashal, shebnei Eretz Yisrael ye'adru me'eretz Yisrael, that there are no Jews in Israel. Chalila la'el me'asotzot, ki hu ivtiach, hu meaning God, shelo yimche otot ha'uma mikol v'chol, in addition, v'lo yesham beidin, v'lo yeh b'chutz la'aretz beitin shenismach ba'aretz as a temporary measure. Hinei cheshbonenu ze lo yoilenu klum b'shum panim. Ulefi she'ein lanu lechashev chodeshim u'la'ber shanim b'chutz la'aretz ele b'tna'im ha'nizkarim kemo she'beyarnu ki mitzion tetei Torah. There's no calendar. There's no holidays. There's Shabbos. This Shabbos. That's all there is. Nothing. No holidays, no calendars, no months, garnished. Because everything is from here. So it is obviously it's a mitzvah to know these things, all right? But the point is, that this is that it's so being astronomically literate is critical, certainly for the elite class, for the rabbinical class. So it's either a sin of omission if you don't learn it, or it's a sin of commission if you don't learn it. And so, but obviously, it's part of your. If you want to be Talmid Chacham, it's something you have to know. Okay. Similarly, the Mishnah says in brachas is number 2 that you make a bracha some masabrachas on hazikin. So says, what's my zikin? The Gemara didn't know what it is. What is it? So Amar Shmuel, koch v'deshavit. It's a comment. Amar Shmuel, nihirin li shvili dishmaya kishvili denardo. I know my way around the paths of heaven, like I know how to drive around Nardea, which is where I come from. This is always something which is to his credit. And Shmuel was who? He was the founder. He and Rav were the founders of. There was a base medrash that was Torah there, but the founder, the Amoraic establishment, there's these two people. And Surah Pumbedita, Rav was in Surah, and he was in Hardea, and then he was in Pumbedita. I mean, so we're talking about the series, and nobody says boo. It's a given. Okay, so here you have something which is universal and particularistic at the same time. Now, again, we come back to this Medrash HaGadol that we talked about last time, where we found that sort of odd, well, it's not really random, but random, what's the word, girsa. Ushma says the Medrash HaGadol, Ushmartem v'asitem ki hi chokhmatchem uvinatchem le'inei ha'amim. Ezo hi chokhma uvina shehi le'inei ha'amim. Hevei omer, ze chishut tkufot v'gematriyaot. Not just mazalot. Geometry. Rabbi Elazar ben Chisma omer, kinim upitchei nida hein hem gufei Torah. Kufot v'gematriyaot properot lechokhma. It's not. Pitchei nida. First of all, what's a pitchei nida? Pitchei nida means, okay, it can mean, among other things, calculating a woman's vesset. Okay, so that's math. He says, all right, so, okay, so kufot v'gematriyaot, it's, what should we say? It's add-ons. But it's not illegitimate. Now, what you have here, interestingly, you've got Rabbi Yochanan says a mitzvah. Rabbi Shimon Lehi says it's a crime of omission if you don't learn it. And you have Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri who says, no, who is this? Rabbi Elazar ben Chisma says, no, but it's legitimate. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri omer, atumot v'ta'arot, ha'kinim v'anidot, hein gufei Torah. So okay, that seems like it's just what's pure, what's impure. Oh, it's all very nice. Those are right, except for kinim. If you ever try to study Masechet Kinim, it's all probability. A friend of mine, Professor Moshe Kapel, wrote a parish on Kinim, and he proved without a shadow of a doubt that it's based on a very advanced sense of mathematical probability. Meaning that the mathematical sophistication of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, or the ones who originally put Kinim together, was very significant. Take a look at Rav Nachman Rabinovich Zatzal. His doctorate was on probability in math. Mathematical probability in rabbinic literature and halacha. But you got to know math. Okay? And finally, Amar Marzutra Bar Tuvia, Amar Rav Himnon, Amarav Hamotia Chut Shel Tfirat Shabbat Chayav Chatat. A bunch of things. So if you tighten a thread on Shabbos, that's tofer. V'lamei davar echad men amagush chayav misa. You shouldn't go study with pagan priests. What's a magus? What is it? What's a magush? December. You guys grew up in Chutz La'aretz. Who were the Magi?
Oh, okay.
Magi is plural for magus. The three Magi were three Kohanei Avodah Zarah who came and they found Sarah's star, and they figure prominently in the nativity story. Okay, so you shouldn't go study with non-Jewish, with pagan priests. And they add and says Hayodeh lechashev tkufot u'mazlot ve'ino mechashev asur l'saper imenu. It makes him illegitimate. All right. What all of these three things have in common, what all these statements have in common, is that there are areas of science that are built into Torah, whether they're legitimate or whether they're critical. Nobody says they're not legitimate, and you can add all kinds of stuff to that. You can't. If anybody who learned Eruvin or Sukkah knows, without basic geometry and math, you can't build a Sukkah. Not only that, you can't understand the Gemara. Never mind build a Sukkah. There's the old joke about I built a house according to the specs that were given by Rashi, but it fell down. And somebody said, "What did you think?" I said, "Well, let's ask that question. Why did it fall down?" But the point is that just a simple reading of Chazal leaves you with that. So when we talk about Torah u'mada or Torah u'chokhmah, it's not, you got to define your terms, because astronomy and astrology are clearly part of Torah. Okay. Interestingly, I brought number 4 just because it's sort of fun. The Rambam had a very sophisticated, big surprise. The Rambam had a very sophisticated grasp of astronomy, and if you take a look, if you try to get through, it's very hard. I mean, I took astronomy in college, and I just get it. Very not. If you don't have a background, it's hard to understand. And the Ravid, Shalok Darko Bakodesh, practically says nothing. Practically says nothing. Okay? He gets to one point, which is involved in the relationship between a Gemara and astronomy, and he jumps up. He says, Omer Avraham, this is on Kiddush HaChodesh Perek Zayin Halacha Zayin, Mipnei shemechaber hazeh mitgader me'od. He said, this author, he's so proud of himself. He's so pleased with himself. He's in there clapping himself on the back. He's so proud of him. He's such a master of this. As far as he's concerned, he has just mastered it totally. He says, I'm not an astronomer. Okay? Even my teachers didn't study astronomy. I'm not such a big expert, so I have nothing to say here. However, I asked, how can he possibly say this? So he's sitting there going, I don't have a background in all of this. I'm not that sophisticated. But when it comes to the basics, this I know, and here he's wrong. So he's like, he's waiting. He went through it. He's waiting to see where can he catch the Rambam. But the point is that, again, he doesn't say it's a waste of time. He says, we didn't study it, because the truth is, The truth is, in parts of Provence and in Ashkenaz, they didn't study it. However, if you read Rashi knew math. All right, so I wanted to. That was important in terms of continuing last time's discussion, because of the issue of Torah and science, and defining the terms. Okay, now when we talk about Torah u'Mada, Mada in the Middle Ages. Okay, so one of the I have a friend who's a professor of Bible of Tanakh at Bar Ilan, Professor Ravi Faust, and he is fond of saying that the reason why Israelis have trouble understanding Tanakh is because they speak Hebrew. What does that mean? What it means is that words don't always mean the same thing. The meaning the initial meaning that we have of things is not. They don't always mean the same things. Meanings change with time. There's I think his name is Elon Levy, or not Elon Gold. No, Elon Gold. There's a guy on TikTok. I'm not telling you to look at TikTok. But if you're already at TikTok, and not to waste your time in doom scrolling, there's a guy who's named Elon Gold, who is a what do they call it? He's a Balshan. He's an expert in language, and he talks about the origins of Hebrew words. So from him you can get, first of all, it enriches your Hebrew. Second of all, you get a consensus about how the meaning of words can change. So the same thing over here. Mada today means hard science. Okay? It's the word that we use for science. It doesn't necessarily mean that in medieval, in pre-modern Hebrew. There can just mean anything, because there was no division until Descartes, or maybe to Francis Bacon, until Descartes anyways. There was no really hard division between what we would call the humanities and social sciences and the hard sciences. If you look at the curriculum that was set forth by Aristotle especially, okay, there's no distinction. Aristotle talks about learning rhetoric, and in the Middle Ages certainly you have the trivium and the quadrivium, the three basic and then the four basic sciences. And okay, there are different ways to calculate what they are, but they include rhetoric and logic and math and chemistry and biology and physics and metaphysics, which is the reason the world works, and we would call it later that became part of theology. I mean, all the things are all mixed up because Aristotle was the opinion that the same methodology can explain everything. Correct. So right, so the book of Mada means knowledge. So when I say Torah Mada, I also mean I also mean what we would call chokhmah, philosophy, maybe literature. I mean, it's a much broader definition. Culture doesn't quite make it either, but it's closer. Okay, that's number one. And the truth of the matter is, I mean, this is my opinion. I mean, we can discuss this further as we go into the year. I am totally of the opinion that the challenge, the Torah is far more challenged by non-hard sciences than by social sciences and by literature and philosophy and stuff like that. I never understood why what shall we say? Why evolution became like the breaking point. It didn't, and I mean, in this, I learned this from Soloveitchik. I mean, it's not, the distance is not that hard, and it's not that hard to coordinate it. If you're a Christian, and everything has got to be literal, then you have a problem. But Torah Shabbat Pes says everything has to be interpreted, and that there are many different levels of understanding and appreciation. What? I mean, I agree. Well, okay. I mean, it's if it's God's word, it clearly has many levels of understanding. Just because the Christians, especially Protestants are like the worst in this. Just because Protestants are literalists, I mean, and sometimes they even get the literal wrong. Because, for example, in the Ten Commandments, it does not say, "Thou shalt not kill." It says, "Thou shalt not murder." In fact, one of the few places where the average person who liked to learn Chumash actually learned some Vulgate is from the parish of the Rashbam. The Rashbam used to talk with various Christian Bible scholars and who would consult with him. And when he gets to Lo Sirtzach, I think it is, he says, the Goyim, they say it means Lo Taharog, but it doesn't mean that. It means Lo Tertzach. But they translated it wrong. And if you look at the Vulgate, the classic Latin translation of the Bible by a guy named Jerome, who was a Samaritan, for those of you who don't know, it says no nochides, don't kill. All right, so that's their problem. It's not my problem. The issue of issues with regard to philosophy and psychology and social sciences and culture and stuff like that, and philosophy and metaphysics, those are things which are much more challenging, and that's why it's important for us to start by doing we won't do it today, I see, high level philosophy, and then we'll again as time goes on towards the second Zman, towards spring Zman, we'll talk more about we have to talk about popular culture also, but that'll be you'll see that'll integrate into the sort of like more sophisticated, highbrow, smoke a pipe and drink sherry at the fireplace type of discussion. In either event, it's quarter of 3, so we'll stop here, and next week we will continue. So if you have the sheets, bring them with you.